In 1987, Opal Weil, then 82 years old, resided in Pinellas County, Florida. She lived alone near her brother and sister-in-law and received frequent visits from family members. The morning of February 9, 1987, Opal's sister-in-law had given her a call, but she didn't answer the phone, which was unusual. The sister-in-law kept dialing Opal every 5 minutes, thinking she was out for a walk. Still no response. The sister-in-law dropped by, noticing that the kitchen's nightlight was still on, which seemed strange because Opal would usually turn it off every time she woke up by 6 a.m. Subsequently, the sister-in-law discovered a window pane removed from a door that led into the room. It was leaning against an outer wall. Inside, the sister-in-law made a horrific discovery. Opal's body was found in a bedroom. She had facial bruises, ligature marks around her neck, and blood around her mouth. When investigators got to the scene of the crime, they saw that a telephone line's ground wire had been severed, but the service had not been interrupted. Although there were no fingerprints on the window pane, the room's door and the area around the latch had scratches, pry marks, and markings of leather or gloves. Investigators found that boxes were partially left open, and that multiple drawers looked like they had been opened in a hurry. Among the things taken were Opal's wedding ring and a jewelry box, with the lid removed and the felt lining slightly out of it. Hairs from the individual that the authorities assumed to be the culprit were retrieved from Opal's house. Despite this, investigators were only able to create a partial DNA profile. They didn't find a match until the cold case detectives reached the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and Parabon Nanolabs to test again in December 2020. This is what Parabon employee Dr. Ellen had to say about the procedure. With the help of this data, we are able to upload it to the genetic genealogy database and other sites where individuals have voluntarily provided their DNA for law enforcement matching. Since we know that they must have common ancestors at some point in the past, our genealogists are capable of establishing family trees and subsequently going back in time. Their objective is to find those ancestors so they reassemble the family trees, identify them, and then check who is currently alive. Parabon was able to identify 3 brothers as possible suspects. Out of them, detectives ruled out 2 potential suspects, one of which is deceased. That left Michael Lapniewski of Mississippi. To verify the forensic match, detectives launched an undercover operation. They collected used red coffee straws and a restaurant spoon containing Lapniewski's DNA, which matched the profile from the hairs retrieved from Opal's residence. They were able to obtain the restaurant spoon thanks to the assistance of a Bay St. Louis Police Department officer who was the owner of that restaurant and knew the suspect personally. He launched a neighborhood campaign as part of the plan, giving away free meals to express gratitude to neighbors and promoting the restaurant to locals. Investigators distributed a flyer to entice Lapniewski to come there, and as a result, they got themselves a spoon and fork that he used. Lapniewski lived less than a half-mile away from Opal at the time of the incident in 1987. During an interview with investigators, Lapniewski denied being in her neighborhood at the time of crime. He denied recognizing Opal, seeing her, interacting with her, or visiting her house. On January 26, 2023, 55-year-old Michael Lapniewski Jr. was detained in Mississippi and accused of killing Opal Weil. Dr. Joseph Seo, a professor of criminal justice at St. Leo University, believes Lapniewski had committed other offenses as well. According to him, investigators will now probably search this area, as well as other places Lapniewski has resided within the nation to find out if he is linked to any more crimes. As long as you know what you're looking for, connecting them shouldn't be too difficult. Dr. Joseph advised looking for resemblances that are not organic or typical. In 1987, Eleanor Swift was killed 4 days after Opal Weil's body was discovered at her house. 9 days later, an 86-year-old woman, Maria L., was attacked, but she made it out alive. At the time, detectives believed there to be a link between the 2 crimes. They will now look into the possibility that Lapniewski could be the one responsible. On December 22, 1989, Natasha Alex Carter was born to mother Susan Gale Carter and father Ricky Lafferty. Her family and friends knew her by her middle name, Alex. A complicated family background characterized her life, which was tragically disrupted on August 8, 2000, when she and her 41-year-old mother, Susan, unexpectedly went missing. Natasha was born into a world full with ambiguity and oncoming turbulence, as her early years were clouded by the stormy custody dispute between her parents, Ricky Lafferty and Susan Gale Carter. Conflict plagued the couple's relationship and was worsened by Susan's diagnosis of bipolar disorder, for which she refused treatment. Nonetheless, after Susan was seen hanging around with other men, subsequently striking up an intimate relationship with the couple's landlord, the marriage came to an end. Susan and Larry tied the knot in 1998, and by the means of Larry's strong connections, Susan was able to secure custody of Natasha, despite the concerns regarding her mental health presently. What transpired was a bitter and intense court battle between Susan and Ricky for Natasha's custody. During a mediation hearing, Susan allegedly threatened Ricky Lafferty, saying he was never going to see Natasha again, which turned the custody battle into a more sinister situation. The following hearing, Susan did not show up, and Ricky was granted the custody of their daughter. Susan and Natasha's lives took an unexpected turn on August 8, 2000, when they disappeared without leaving any trace. In the months preceding her disappearance, Natasha, who was just 10 years old at the time, had not been in contact with her father, Ricky. As Ricky started to worry, he approached Susan's current husband, Larry, to find out where his daughter was, to which he received a confusing reply. In response, Larry first stated that Susan and Natasha had departed with a man named Jose, but that they would be back soon. But when Ricky grew increasingly concerned, he contacted Larry a second time just a few days later. This time, however, he was told a different narrative. Larry stated, "Susan and Natasha went somewhere with a guy named Manuel." The constantly changing names of the people added another degree of perplexity to the mystery. Considering Susan's statement about how she would make sure Ricky never saw his daughter again, detectives assumed Susan was responsible for kidnapping Natasha. Natasha's grandma, who thought that she was terrified of her mother and did not want to live with her, supported this theory. Following their disappearance on November 13, 2000, Susan Gale Carter was charged with kidnapping and a felony warrant was issued for her. The initial account portrayed Natasha as the victim of a family kidnapping and speculated that she would probably be with her mother and a senior man. An additional factor making it harder to find them was the danger that they could have possibly crossed state boundaries. With no significant lead or notable finding, the case has remained unsolved over the years. Ricky Lafferty, Natasha's father, never gave up hope that he would one day be reunited with his daughter. Even after 20 years, the case was neither dismissed nor considered to be unsolvable. Despite the case receiving minimal attention of media, the authorities persisted in their efforts to uncover the truth and bring justice to Natasha and her family. In the year 2021, the FBI increased the incentive for critical information regarding Natasha or her mother Susan's whereabouts. Susan may have also been going by the alias Susan Gale Carter Webb, according to information provided by police enforcement that same year. However, when the case displayed no signs of progress, detectives started to consider the idea that what they had initially thought to be an abduction could instead have been an instance of foul play. The primary suspect in Natasha's disappearance, Susan Gale Carter, was no longer the primary subject of the inquiry. According to recently discovered evidence by the West Virginia State Police, Susan and Natasha disappeared oddly at the same time. The West Virginia State Police released a statement in which they stated that, although Susan Carter's abduction of Natasha Carter was initially mentioned in the case file, the investigation has shown that Susan Carter and Natasha Carter are both missing and have been since August 8, 2000. The entire tale of their disappearance was rewritten by this discovery. When West Virginia authorities focused on Larry Webb's house at the 100 block of Kyle Lane, where Susan and Natasha were residing around the time of their disappearances, the case took an unexpected turn. On the August of 2023, FBI began an in-depth inspection of the property in an attempt to find information pertaining to Natasha and Susan's disappearances. Now in his 80s, Webb claimed to have dementia and trouble remembering. Throughout a press conference conducted at the time of the FBI investigation, Webb seemed baffled by the unexpected entry into his house. He asserted that he didn't understand why the police were searching through his property. He did, however, express a small amount of familiarity when the name Natasha was used, and he stated that he thought they were wed when Susan's name was brought up. He also mentioned, in a fairly disjointed recall, that the mother and daughter had seemingly gone while he was away on a trip. According to Terry Lilly, Webb's live-in caretaker, the FBI investigation resulted in a surprising discovery. It was reported that the investigators discovered a bullet in the bedroom wall that purportedly had Natasha's DNA, though it hasn't been verified yet. The basement floor's tiles were additionally searched out by the authorities. Larry Webb was accused of first-degree murder of Natasha in October 2023. This marked an important turning point in the case. Notably, Webb has not been charged in relation to Susan's disappearance, therefore that aspect of the case remains unsolved. Despite these advances, there is still ambiguity about Natasha and Susan's ultimate fate, as they still remain missing. Webb awaits trial while the investigation is still ongoing. Born and raised in West Virginia, a state renowned for its breathtaking natural beauty and close-knit neighborhoods, Natalie Cochran was a qualified pharmacist. Living a fairly normal life with her spouse, Michael Cochran, she made a home for herself there. Natalie and Michael appeared to be sharing a peaceful life till February 11, 2019, when Michael unexpectedly passed away, violently shattering their pleasant lives. The following year, Natalie was thrown into the spotlight as a result of unraveling of a Ponzi scheme, along with the rising suspicions that her involvement in her husband's demise was deeper and more malicious than previously thought. Federal prosecutors launched a civil lawsuit against Natalie Cochran in July of 2019, stating she fraudulently perpetrated a financial scheme together with her late husband, Michael. The Cochrans owned two companies, Tactical Solutions Group and Technological Management Studios. It was alleged that they misled investors into believing that Tactical had contracts with the government to provide semi-automated weaponry to different defense agencies, including the U.S. Department of Defense. These accusations served as the catalyst for a convoluted judicial conflict. The civil lawsuit contends that the Cochran family tricked investors into thinking that their government contracts were legitimate. Overall, the two companies raised a minimum of $2.5 million from 11 investors. While investors were assured of substantial profits on the money they invested, the reality was quite the opposite. U.S. Attorney Mike Stewart reported that Tactical did not have any government contracts pertaining to semi-automatic firearms. Instead, the Cochrans are suspected of squandering investor funds on extravagant living, fancy dining, and other personal expenditures. Tactical funded a number of local organizations, such as the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League and the football department of Shady Spring Middle School. Additionally, they provided semi-automatic guns to Shady Spring High School during a fundraiser, in which they were used as bingo prizes. Between half of the money going to Shady Spring High Volleyball and the other half going to the Shady Spring Youth's Baseball League, for whom Natalie served as treasurer, this fundraiser raised almost $32,000. Even with these major contributions, doubts regarding the finances' validity started to surface. The league board member, James Quisenberry, reported that multiple unauthorized withdrawals were made from the league account, while also revealing that Tactical's check for $16,680 was bounced. To look into the financial records, an internal audit was performed. Natalie filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in July as the legal attention grew. Her bankruptcy papers indicated that she had relatively little income and assets. Her bank account balance was reported to be less than $600, whilst her liabilities were an astounding amount of $1.4 million. The accusations against the Cochrans spurred both state and federal investigators into their business operations. The investors reportedly received letters on a U.S. Department of Defense letterhead, assuring them that their investment returns would be provided after some time. Natalie insisted that the majority of the investment-related data was classified and off-limits to discussion. During a creditors' meeting, Natalie stated that she was unable to reimburse her creditors because her banking accounts were blocked by West Virginia State Police and federal authorities. Michael Cochran, Natalie's spouse and her business partner, passed away at Bowers Hospice House on February 11, 2019. It was reported that he had struck his head following a seizure 5 days prior. The circumstances surrounding Michael's death led to an additional inquiry by the authorities. Account states that Michael had been hospitalized several times in the prior months for an unspecified illness. A Raleigh County official revealed that West Virginia State Police were investigating the case. In an unexpected turn of events, a court order was carried out to exhume Michael Cochran's remains from Sunset Memorial Gardens in early September. According to reports, the court order's copy was kept confidential, awaiting the conclusion of federal and state inquiries into the events leading up to his untimely demise. Natalie insisted that her husband's death resulted from a seizure that had been triggered by an unintentional fall, affecting his head. She refuted having anything to do with Michael's accident and claimed that he was taken to the hospital within 20 minutes. There were, however, different stories about the chronology of events and the presence of other adults in the house during the crucial hours leading up to Michael's hospitalization. Natalie was charged in November 2021 with first-degree murder for killing her husband. The fact that Natalie was already serving an 11-year federal prison sentence for her role in the Ponzi scheme at the time added weight to the suspicions that she was involved in Michael's demise. In a Raleigh County courtroom, the proceedings took a surprising turn during the hearing. Natalie showed up in the courtroom with cuffs on her hands, a brown skirt, and khaki pants. Her family members, including the 2 of her teenage children, were present. The prosecution unexpectedly chose to withdraw its charges against Natalie. The stated explanation was the need for additional time to collect evidence. The prosecution made a calculated move that was meant to permit a second inspection of Michael's body. Ben Hatfield, the prosecutor for Raleigh County, made the move to drop the charges, emphasizing the significance of re-examining the body to the case. Hatfield went on to say that before to formally requesting the exhumation, he had conferred with Michael's relatives. Hatfield did not make the choice to re-exhume the remains hastily. He sought the advice of a specialist to make sure the investigation was going to yield strong evidence supported by science. Hatfield's proposal stemmed from the requirement for a specific test capable of determining the amount of insulin present in tissue samples. When Michael's body was first excavated in September 2019, an autopsy was performed, but this test was not done at that time. There was a degree of uncertainty due to the absence of this particular test. Once the examination was over, Hatfield said it was quite probable he would re-indict Natalie for her husband's murder. The prosecution's moves were not met with opposition from Natalie's defense counsel, which sparked an interest regarding their approach. One of Cochran's lawyers, Matthew Victor, announced that this step will offer them a chance to acquire more evidence from the federal investigation. Their objective was to prove Michael's involvement in the Ponzi scheme, which, if confirmed, would have a major effect on the state's case. Even with the indictment withdrawn, Natalie's federal sentence still required her to serve several more years. This factor influenced the decision for dropping the charges. The aim was to use her federal term as an opportunity to collect additional evidence and carry out the required testing. After the hearing, Natalie got a quick opportunity to talk with her family before being led by the police out of the courtroom. She said goodbye to her kids and expressed her affection for them in a heartfelt conversation. Michael Cochran's parents attended the hearing as well. On October 24, 2023, Raleigh County Prosecutor Ben Hatfield made an announcement regarding the most recent development in Natalie Cochran's case. He stated that a special grand jury had re-indicted Natalie and accused her of murdering Michael. Following the excavation of the body, a distinguished Texas forensic pathologist attested to the fact that Michael's death had been caused by an outside source, the unapproved exogenous insulin that had entered his system. Given that the special grand jury session was held so late in the term, Natalie Cochran is anticipated to face trial in 2024 and be deemed guilty of all counts brought against her. On January 7, 2012, Desiree Thompson was involved in a case of domestic violence with her spouse, Edward Gibson. This came after police reported that she had been physically abused by her man, Edward Gibson, in their residence in California City. As per the release from the district attorney's office, Desiree Thompson went missing, and her case was abandoned after a decade, as no leads were found that could tell what happened to her. That evening, Miss Thompson had left her house at 6 o'clock to go see a friend, and she had last spoken to her mother at 8:30. Desiree Thompson's mother had asked her to call back after she arrived home safely, but she never did, and she was never seen or heard from after that. That night, she was last spotted at a liquor store in California City. On July 2022, the Kern County coroner disclosed that Thompson's body was discovered in the backyard of the former home of Jose William Lara in California City. Before two informants came forward with insights into who was responsible for killing Thompson, the DA's office claims that there had been no developments regarding the case for nearly 10 years. The informants stated that Lara had revealed to them what he had done in 2012, and they did their best to aid the police through offering crucial information that made the case easier to solve. According to the DA's office, the California City Police Department utilized DNA evidence and other forensic science resources to prove that Lara killed Desiree. This was made possible with assistance from the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, Edwards Air Force Base, and the current Regional Crime Lab. According to the DA's office, the evidence presented during the trial showed that Lara had met Desiree on her way home, and he then escorted her to his house, where he then viciously took her life. After that, Lara disposed of Desiree's body in his backyard, where police eventually found her remains. Both the prosecution and the defense delivered their concluding remarks before to the jury's deliberations. Prosecutor Christine Antonios claimed that Lara was enraged after being expelled from a Diablo party. He intended to get revenge on somebody, so he murdered Thompson, who was a stranger to him. According to the prosecutor, Javier Morfin Sr. and Javier Morfin Jr. informed Detective Brandenburg that Lara had confessed to them he had slain Thompson in his residence. He claimed to have taken the lady home, bashed her skull into the fridge, then stabbed, burned, and finally buried her, stated Antonios. The scorched remains of Desire were discovered in Lara's previous house's backyard. The 61-year-old attorney, Mark Stamper, claimed that Lara was working side jobs at the time and needed money. According to him, it was Gibson who hired Lara to bury Thompson. That's not just a reasonable conclusion, Stamper continued. That is a common-sense conclusion that the man who threatened his wife with a gun murdered her and hired someone else to get rid of the body, my client. After knowing about the incident, Eyewitness News spoke with her mother. She states that she's still having trouble putting everything together. The trial started on May 9, 2023. Given the conviction, Lara could receive a sentence ranging from 25 years to life in prison. The sentencing date is set for June 16, 2023, at 8:30 a.m. District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer remarked, "It is essential that increased violent crime rates are countered with effective prosecution," in response to 3 verdicts, including those of George Richard Smith and Andrew Barraza. These murder convictions demonstrate the commitment of the DA's homicide unit prosecutors to bringing the victims of heinous acts to justice. The DA's homicide team is hard at work locking up perpetrators and providing victims and their families justice, whether it be in the case of gunshots on the city streets, a murder that occurred 10 years ago and was covered up, or a homicide under domestic abuse. A jury convicted Jose William Lara guilty by unanimous decision after about 30 minutes of deliberation. The 61-year-old is allegedly charged with committing murder in the first degree. Before a planned surgery in Mexico in 2002, a 60-year-old man going by the name Edward C. checked into an unkempt motel in a border town in Arizona, though he never checked out. On September 8, 2002, his body was discovered within the rented room that was in Nogales, Arizona. Although his fingerprints had been collected, officials were not able to formally identify the individual who had listed under a Florida address, and he was summarily filed as Nogales John Doe. 20 years later, 19 students from New Jersey's Ramapo College employed genetic genealogy to aid Arizonan authorities, and they finally solved the case late last month, said the school officials, who spoke with the press. Ramapo students identified the individual as Donald Sigurd Hadland Jr., a 60-year-old man who had traveled thousands of miles from his home in New Mexico in order to save money for his medical treatment by examining distinctive patterns on DNA obtained from a blood sample. In January, a distance-learning investigative genetic genealogical program at Ramapo, a public liberal arts college in Mahwah, was introduced. For $6,000, students can enroll in a 15-week non-credit course that teaches forensic evidence techniques from start to end. According to Ramapo's Carrie-Ann Binder, who spoke with the Post, the students examined the genetic matches from his created DNA profile to determine if they aligned with Mr. Hadland's familial relationships. We suspected who it might be going in. Therefore, our goal was to find out if the DNA matching corresponded with the individual's family tree. In cooperation with the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit organization that has identified over 65 victims who had been unidentified since 2017, the Ramapo College of New Jersey Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center looked into the unresolved case. Earlier this year, according to Binder, the medical examiner's office in Pima County, Arizona, requested assistance from the organizations. The initial police inquiry became complicated when Edward C., the alleged name of the man discovered in the city motel, was related to identity theft and deceit in St. Petersburg, Florida, where he claimed to be from. Donald Hadland was identified through a fingerprint lookup. However, authorities were unable to establish whether that name was also fabricated. Through the implementation of DNA analysis of the retrieved blood sample, students at Ramapo College created a profile of Nogales John Doe in the GED Match genealogical database. Students looked through matches from the Nogales John Doe DNA profile, since they already had a lead from the fingerprint, and they discovered a few reasonably close relatives who aligned with Hadland's family tree, according to Binder. She went on, "We refer to it as an investigative lead. As we determine the man's identification via genetic matches, we turn it over to the medical examiner, which we did in early May." The Sacramento Bee was informed by Pima County forensic anthropologist Bruce Anderson that this led the authorities to Hadland's ex-wife, with whom he had a son. The woman claimed to authorities that she hadn't seen Hadland since he allegedly abandoned both of them in the latter part of the 1980s. The identity of the man discovered in the Nogales motel was verified by the son and two grandsons of Hadland, whose profiles were uploaded to the genealogical database. It's possible that this individual was using both Donald and Edward as fraudulent identities, according to Binder. Although it could have been anyone, we were certain it was Mr. Hadland upon examining the DNA matches. Authorities from Pima County verified to the Post that Hadland passed away due to an unintentional overdose of opioid barbiturates. Attempts to get in touch with his family members were futile. The IGG certificate program's director, Binder, stated that the Ramapo team used the GEDmatch.com genealogy database to establish Hadland's family tree. This same technique assisted investigators in identifying the infamous Golden State Killer in 2018, decades after Joseph James DeAngelo had raped and killed women all over California. Users can upload their DNA profiles to gedmatch.com, which collects genetic information from other well-known genealogy websites like Ancestry, 23andMe, or Family Tree DNA, in the hopes of discovering potential relatives. David Gurney, an assistant professor of law and society at Ramapo, who supervises the Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center, co-runs the program alongside Binder, an investigative genetic genealogist. She mentioned that both of them have connections to Pima County, where over 1,200 cases of unidentified remains are being looked at by officials.